Share my screen.
You already had done, didn't you? Yep, you did. I can't believe I turned around. But you're good. Thank you so much. Yep. Yep. They're good. They're good. Thank you, sir. All right, see you now. You hear me, Kim? You're good, right?
Yes, we are good. Thank you, Lawrence.
You're welcome.
Ready to start.
Okay, and welcome back, everybody. Preparation for the subcommittee meeting members. Again, thank you for your service to this committee. Last time's overview discussion gave us a chance to really start thinking about all that we're going to have to talk through. And hopefully today we'll begin the real work of starting to put some things on paper and considering some ideas more deeply as we move forward through this. Van and I have talked through this and looked at survey results that had been submitted. So thanks to all of those who submitted responses to the survey. And we'll use those today in our discussions moving forward. Go ahead and move forward, Kim. Can you advance it one, Kim?
Can you see approving the agenda and minutes slide?
No, it's still on the front page.
Oh.
It advanced on my screen, Hank.
No, there it is. Maybe mine's just laggy.
Okay.
Quite possible. That seems to be me in life right now. So you received the agenda from Kim and the minutes. We need to approve the agenda for today first. Can I get a motion from someone to approve today's agenda?
So moved. Laura Gilberberry.
Thanks, Laura. And a second?
Second, Ray Thompson.
Thank you very much. Our agenda for today is approved. And you should have also received the minutes from our last meeting. Can I get a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved, Christina O'Connor.
Thanks, Christina. With a second?
Second, Heather Bauer.
Thanks, Heather. Any questions or discussion? I didn't ask that last time. Okay. Any opposed to accepting those minutes? All right, then we'll call the agenda and minutes approved from our last meeting and today's meeting. We already advanced it, so I was probably a little behind. The next couple of slides was, opinions of our group and what we're trying to do here. Again, we're looking at keeping in mind the positive impact that our work will have on students in public schools. And we're also trying.
Hi, Hank, we lost you. I think Hank got disconnected. I think he's gone. No, actually it says he's still there. Can anyone hear Hank?
No. Here, Hank.
muted.
We can't change something, then I see Ian Baxter saying he can hear me. Can everyone else hear me?
We can now, thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that. But again, main thing I wanted to put across, and that Van wants to put across as well, is that, you know, we want every perspective, that nobody is going to be stopped from sharing something, that the ramifications of any, you know, perspectives will be discussed, and we're going to come up with what we believe best serves the students of North Carolina. And our program serves them and the school systems that support them. So please be vocal, share everything you want to share, and know that we're taking everything to heart and that we can make changes to the initial proposal. And Ken, we want to go forward again? I must be on a real lag here. I apologize. Today's work in particular, I'll try to talk.
Can't hear you, Hank.
I'm messaging him right now.
Licensure areas.
Oh, there. There it is.
You know that?
We can hear you now.
Christina's that she can't. I apologize.
Wait, do you want to try to leave the meeting and come back? We can't hear you. Now we can hear you. There's a lot of static. How about everyone turn their videos off? That would be great.
Oh, technology.
Thank you.
I wonder if it would be better if Dr. Weddington tried to call in as opposed to using the computer. There is that option with the WebEx as well.
I agree. Let me try to message him.
Hey, Kim, I'll go ahead and walk through the next few pieces of information while we get Hank back on.
That would be great. Thank you, Mandy.
We also wanted to remind people of the guiding principles that all of the subcommittees at PEPSC are using in this process. One is to be able to identify ways that the ideas that might get presented are having a positive impact on students' learning and student experiences. And then the second of the guiding principles is the activity, initiative, or component of the pathway measurable in an authentic setting, meaning in the presence of students and in the actual context of their learning. So those two guiding principles we're holding on to all the way through the process. If we've got a slide, the next slide. And so we also want to remind people of the full frame of the pathways, which are represented here. I think most people by now are familiar with the visual. We are focusing in the initial step On the learning permit access point and the license one access point, that's the framing for today's conversation and the feedback and perspective we saw in the initial tool that Kim sent out. So we have captured that information. It's been pulled together in summary form. Part of what we'll talk about in just a minute is one of our goals today is to expand that in case people who are on the call didn't have a chance to complete the feedback tool or have additional ideas they want to add into today's conversation, and then do some work around synthesizing that information. What are the key elements and the key components of this initial perspective gathering that we want to make sure that we capture today? So that's what we're going to do when we get into the breakout groups in just a few minutes. Kim, we can go ahead and move forward. These are the questions that we're using in the preparation and entry subcommittee. The requirements for entering the profession for the various entry points. And so we're asking, what is it that we would expect a potential candidate to have when they come into that, when they enter at the different pathway points and the pathways to excellence? What role can the EPP play in supporting early career teachers at the different entry points? What role can the LEA play in supporting early career teachers? How would the beginning teacher support program need to be modified, if it does, and to support the new system? And then how would the EPP accountability model need to be modified to support the licensure system? So those are our preparation and entry subcommittee key questions. So here, hang on, if you're back on yet.
Hey man, can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay, sorry about that.
No problem.
I had bad internet today. So our idea is to do two separate breakout groups. One that's job alike or role alike grouping, and then a mixed grouping after that, so that we get the most perspectives possible from the groups. We know that there are areas that our LEA folks will have specific concerns, issues, questions, ideas about, and the same for our EPPs. So starting with the role alike grouping, we're hoping that we can get a good idea of what those specific concerns or issues or questions are. And then we'll come back together as a whole group after 30 minutes and share out. Then the idea is, after you've talked about that with your role alike grouping, and during that time we'll be talking about the learning permit and the license one are the two areas that we're focused on. We'll do some mixed grouping, cross-role grouping, so that we can get into some questions a little bit better across the two groups, and maybe come to some consensus about what we feel are the criteria necessary. In that SharePoint site that Kim sent out to you, the link there, you'll find in there all of the groups, and there are notes, note sheets for each group. So once we get into the breakout groups, each group will assign a facilitator and a note taker. We really want to make sure and capture as much of the discussion as possible, and that person can share back out what the group talked about when we come back together as a whole group. Anything's on the table again, make sure that you keep that in mind. We want to hear every idea and take everything into account as we go forward. We're hoping that you'll look at the survey results, which are also in the SharePoint folder, and use those as a starting place to add to pull out of, and to make sure that we're capturing all of the ideas and trying to answer all the concerns that were shared through those. We're asking each group to list 3 to 5 criteria for each one of the questions, and there's 3 questions on each one. One is basically what we expect the person to possess in terms of credentials to enter at the learning permit and the license one pathways, and also that what kind of support do we expect LEAs to provide for both those licensure tracks, and what kind of EPP support would we expect to be provided for those folks coming in with that particular set of credentials. So we're gonna break out. The next slide actually shows the breakout groups and how we've got everybody together. Round one, you'll see, are the rural light groups, and round two are the mixed groups. And so, Jim, I guess at this point, we can go ahead and start those breakout groups for each person. And you'll go to your assigned breakout group and get started with 30 minutes of talk on this particular issue.
I'll just need a couple minutes to assign everybody since I was sharing my screen. So if everybody could just hold tight. Thank you.
Van, do you have anything to add to what we're hoping for during the breakouts while we're waiting?
Only that to reiterate what you said, you did a nice job covering the sort of the planning for the conversation. One is for people to put issues and ideas on the table in the discussions in as authentic a way as you can, given what opportunities and issues you might see in the discussion and around the questions that we're going to use for the areas of focus. Because part of our goal here is to capture that as much as we possibly can. Also, in that people have seen the data that people have already provided, you can see that in the summary documents. We want to make sure that we're sharing that with people as transparently as we can, so folks know the kind of feedback that we received in the initial language people offered, and then of course you'll participate in what we do today. So our goal is to make sure that the language that we're capturing and the ideas that we're capturing are representative of the group and the subcommittee members. So I appreciate it. Thank you, Hank.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I'll go ahead and start breakout groups.
Thanks, Kim.
And there will be 30 minutes, and they'll let you know 1 minute before you'll come back to the full session. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim.
Thanks, Kim. Kim, are we back?
We are back.
Okay. I think our breakout group needs about another hour. At this point, Kim and Hank, I think what we want to do is get a quick summary from each one of the breakout groups. We have about, I think, what do we have, about 15 minutes to do this?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So EPP Group 1, that's Aaron, one we were in.
Yes. So we discussed criteria for entry, and we worked under the assumption that they are hired by a school district to apply for the learning permit, and that we were wanting for it to be spelled out like what specifically working under the supervision of an advanced teacher means, like being in the classroom with a teacher of record, not necessarily being the teacher of record themselves, but then our criteria for entry would be that they are demonstrating academic competency either through holding an associate's degree, and that could be either the AA or the ASTP or another associate's degree that is deemed acceptable by the EPP and or the school district, and then or they meet the admission to teacher candidacy requirements within an EPP with 60 credit hours. So we didn't want to limit that to just those who are going the associate's degree route. But then also enrolled in an approved EPP for a bachelor's program leading to a license. So those were really the three criteria we came up with. We had kind of a lingering question of where does any prior experience fit into that, because that was in the feedback from the survey. And then as well, we had about 5 minutes to talk about EPP supporting teachers holding a learning permit, and we talked about it would require EPPs to be flexible in the times that we hold classes because they would be employed by districts. But also wondering if we could have LEAs and EPPs work together, and EPPs be flexible in the times we hold classes, but also LEAs being flexible and allowing release time for those learning permit teachers to be able to go to classes during sometimes during the school day, and then EPPs continuing to provide that supervision and support to the learning permit holders while they are in the classroom.
Thank you, Aaron. We learned in our group that if someone volunteers to be the note taker, they basically volunteer to be the presenter. So, because they have the best notes. Any quick questions for EPP Group 1? Okay, LEA Group 1, that's Tanya, Ashley, Donna, Ray, Lydia, Leanna, Tom.
So we began, we spent most of our time talking about the entry criteria. Having an associate's degree in teacher prep or early childhood, or a specific number of years of service within an LEA. We have a lot of teacher assistants who've been teacher assistants for a while, and they have learned an incredible amount, but may not have that specific associates in teacher prep or early childhood, and we want to be able to honor that knowledge. We also talked about already being enrolled in or have a specific number of semester hours towards that bachelor's degree that would lead to a teaching area. And then for the support piece, we didn't quite get there. We knew we did not want them to be the teacher of record. And then I just added in providing a very structured support system specifically for that apprentice learning permit level and the license one, but it's a little bit separate from the regular beginning teacher induction that LEAs typically do, because they need that extra focus all the way through to support them as they work full time and gain that coursework as well. So missed anything, Lydia, Tom, Megan?
No, I think you got it. I think when the question came up that we don't know how long this license will be, So that's really a concern for what the person has to have going into it, because you want them to be successful in whatever that term is in completing the requirements to get to a license one. So that's a real codependency, or that's not probably the right word. With the licensure folks, is how long is that license going to be, so we can set the level of education required to be in the apprentice role to achieve success for these folks.
Any quick questions? LEA Group 2, Scott, Jennifer, Tony, Lauren, AJ, Jeff, Megan.
Well, I guess since I was the note taker, I get to report out. I'll remind myself not to be the note taker from this point forward. No, I'm just kidding. We talked about, for the entry criteria for license one, we really just focused on, we agreed that a bachelor's degree in a content related area would be a minimum. And not just having a bachelor's degree, because we wouldn't want someone from an LEA perspective to be able to go into an area that they don't have the content knowledge. We also talked about having a minimum of an industry certification. But then we really started talking a little bit about, the GPA requirement. Currently looking at it from an HR perspective, it's a 2.7 to get entry into an EPP. And we really talked about maybe looking at a minimum of a 2.5, but the content area needing to be a 2.7 or higher. Maybe trying to look at creating some level of flexibility. Again, the focus being that what we want is someone that in that content area that has the appropriate level of knowledge as evidenced by a certain grade point average. We started talking about like our support and how we would do that at the district level. Again, mentors, coaches. We talked about the difference between LEAs who maybe only have coaches at schools a certain number of days versus the ones who have coaches there who are there full time. And the benefits of a coach who is really strong and being able to help provide feedback on a more consistent basis than that of maybe an administrator. And then just maybe consistent expectations and training for mentors, because in our mind it would be appropriate to compensate these folks who are truly mentors and going above and beyond, but there needs to be some level of expectations of what that would look like so that people, consistently would understand here's what the responsibility of a mentor is. And that's it.
Thank you. Any questions? Additional points? Okay, the last group, the EPP Group 2, Diane, Christina, Randy, Lisa, Laura, Phil, Andy, Andrew.
Well, going by this rule, I guess I was a note taker, so. We started out, we were asked to talk about how an EPP should support someone with a license one, and starting there, our first question was, what are the competencies associated with starting in a license one? Because you really need to know that in order to know how to support them, right? So some of the things that were just discussed about is content knowledge and expectation for license one. If not, then certainly content knowledge is something that they would need support with. We kind of started there with there's a lot we don't know yet about what license one means, and so it's hard. But then we talked about the need for them to have that kind of coaching support, mentoring, and for that to really be a full release person and not a teacher down the hall, but somebody who would be available to observe and give feedback and co-teach and do some demonstration. And because what we do know is that these folks will not have had educator preparation, right? They won't have had any formal training in lesson planning or assessment or those kinds of things. For the benefit of the children that they'll be working with, they need somebody who's available to help them get that knowledge quickly. What are some other things we talked about? I'm talked about, how the EPP could be the provider of services access through those professional learning dollars. So, micro credentials, and that there could be a menu. This was in the survey results, like a menu of options that we provided that License One teachers could access depending on what their needs were. So depending on what they're coming in with, they may have different needs, and so they need the flexibility to be able to get what is needed for them to gain the skills that they're missing. There was also talk in the survey about a supportive network. So, that's another thing. EPPs could, develop those networks, access to networks for License One teachers to work with both teachers who have more experience along with other License One teachers so they could meet and share ideas. We talked about clinical supervision if the teacher is affiliated with an EPP. And then because I was in the group and this is a thing of mine, we talked a lot about the need for the LEA and the EPP to really collaborate on providing that coaching support. That it should be a shared responsibility of the EPP and the LEA to make sure that those License One teachers have access to that high quality coaching that has been mentioned in other groups as well. I think that covers most of what's in the notes. It took us a lot longer to talk about that than it did for me to report it.
Thank you, Christina. Any questions or other comments from that breakout group? So what we're going to do next is we're going to move to a second round of discussion, but we're going to do it in mixed groups. So we'll have LEA and EPP and people from different roles that are in the group together that are going to focus on, we have the questions in the breakout group. So I do want to share a couple of things Hank and I were reminded of in our breakout group. One is that we want to be intentional about the fact that right now we're talking about the first two entry points in the model. Down the road, when we're talking about later entry points, we may realize there are things we want to go back and adjust or revise in the way we talked about the apprenticeship entry point, for example. So we can circle back and update and revise information that we're putting in at each one of the points. And so this is going to be an intentionally recursive process that way. The second is that we want to make sure we're focusing both on capturing limitations and barriers people may see, as well as recommendations for what the structure would need to look like at different entry points. So just want to remind people to make sure they're given those authentic points of information and critique as we're moving through this. Kim, do you need a minute to set up the second breakout groups?
I actually have set them up. I just wanted to let Ray Thompson know I had listed her twice, and she's actually in group 5. Sorry about that, Ray. Are we ready to start the breakout groups?
I think so.
Okay, great. Okay, let's see here. Sammy, you're a cute buddy. I love you, buddy. I love you winning. I love you, Hammy. Sammy is a cute little buddy. Sammy is a cute little buddy. Okay. Where does it say that? Oh. But it's gonna.
I get more of it again.
Okay.
Watch you.
I don't know, probably some YouTube thing.
Won't let me in.
Alexa, broadcast.
What's the announcement?
Alexa, cancel.
I heard it last time.
Okay. I'm gonna make so there's chicken nuggets for dinner. Alexa, broadcast.
What's the announcement?
Girls, come on. It's time to go.
Announcement. Hello. It's time to go.
Shirley, don't forget your socks, honey.
Kim? Are we all back?
We're all back.
Okay, and we'll need to go a little bit faster because we have 5 groups instead of 4, but we'll go through the same process. And I can't wait to hear the summaries of the cross-roll discussions. So group 1 is our group, the one that I was in. Lydia, I think, is doing the summary.
Yes. So the first question that we answered was entry criteria for learning permit. And we were all working under the understanding that this person is not the teacher of record. I think that has been consistent across the surveys and all the conversations that we've heard today. So one of the things that we were thinking is having an associate's degree or 60 credit hours with ATC and an EPP or AATP or ASTP, so those teacher prep programs at the associate level. We also are assuming that if they're coming through one of those associate level teacher preparation programs or an EPP, then they have already experienced supervised and evaluated clinical experiences. However, if they're coming from another associate pathway, what would we require to prove demonstration that they've engaged in some type of equivalent experience in a school setting? Would it need to be supervised and evaluated clinical experiences? Exactly what would that look like? One of the things that we recommended was that if they are coming with an associate that is not that teacher preparation pathway, then they would need to complete a semester with an ETP that included a clinical supervised experience. So, for example, an intro course before starting that learning permit. We did think that there would need to be some language to clarify the differences between the degrees, because 2 of the 4 teacher prep program courses have field experiences. So would this be counted, kind of going back and forth there, is that going to count as their field experience, not for payment? That was a question I had, that just is a field experience in general, or would there be other field experiences that we would accept? How would we know how they performed in those experiences, etc.? Trying to think. And then, would we accept other roles within a school district as a field experience? So, for example, an instructional assistant, could they come in and that count as a field experience, a substitute, etc.? And then also affiliation with an ETP, of course, would qualify them for that learning permit. When looking at the entry criteria for a licensed 1, again, we were looking for them to be paired with a licensed teacher. The language on the diagram that we all have doesn't necessarily say that they would be under that teacher or not the teacher of record, but that they're still paired with that licensed teacher. We felt like having a bachelor's degree with a 2.7 or offering provisional admission into a program where you are continuing to make satisfactory academic progress for teacher preparation. For example, if you don't come in with that 2.7, once you start the program, are you able to earn and maintain at least a 2.7? Because right now, a lot of the EPPs require for our staff to take like a generic class to reset their GPA, and it's only level way through the semester. So we felt like for the really for the sake of time, let's just go ahead and get in there and let them start the coursework and see are they able to do it or not do it within that program. And then they would need to affiliate with an APP, an approved teacher preparation program. And I welcome the other members of my team, specifically those with the collegiate level experience, to jump in and fill in any holes I left out.
Thank you, Lydia. Group 2 is AJ, Laura, Leanna, Olivia, Ashley. You're muted, Laura.
You'd think by now I would have that. I was just talking away. It was good stuff. We had a lot of conversation about our first question of how an APP would support a teacher holding a learning permit. We did talk about how the EPPs need to rethink their approach approach to supporting novice teachers in thinking about rather as courses, maybe there could be more capstone projects, or of course of high rigor, thinking about reconceptualizing activities. Also making sure that there were some supports for those in that category to, whether that was the university support, advising, making sure that they're aware of their degree progression, but then also planting the seed for kind of moving up the model and making sure that those candidates would know exactly what would be expected and what to strive for. We talked a lot about the opportunity for whether it's micro-credentials or different ways of maybe stacking those, thinking about courses, seminars, lots of different ways. Action research we also mentioned as well. For our second question, how will the EPP support a teacher holding a license 1? I think that the same tenets were true for that discussion as well. We really thought the EPPs offering that menu of options was critical. We even talked about having a statewide database for all of those, so folks who are in the field could search those, and that's a real opportunity for our EPPs. And then making sure we did talk about EPPs could assist teachers in the interpretation and use of data through those capstone opportunities or action research. So very similar to other conversations.
Questions or any additional comments? Group 3, Jennifer, Donna, Diana, Scott, Bill, Lauren.
All right, I was the note taker. So we were asked, how should an LEA or school district support a teacher holding a learning permit? Some of the initial thoughts were to pair that person with someone coming in with a learning permit and pair them with someone that is a successful teacher already. Must be able to pay a mentor a substantive rate. Must provide professional development opportunities to provide extended learning opportunities. Adopt a co-teaching model. There was also some thoughts about, are the resources better spent on beginning teacher pay to be able to get our very best right out of college? What kind of credit is going to be given toward the degree path about with what they come with, like the 2 years of undergrad, what kind of credit are they going to get for that? How are we going to figure out the content knowledge? So we kind of propose as if they had a 2-year degree and it was in business or exercise and sports science, then how are we going to translate that into like an elementary teacher, like if they haven't had a biology class since freshman year of high school or something like that. So how are we going to figure out that content knowledge component? And then our other question was, is how should an LEA or school district support a teacher holding a license 1? A lot of it's very similar. Pair them with a successful mentor, good coaching at the school level, consistent and appropriate feedback. And we talked a lot because we feel like this is sort of like the residency model we currently have, is that as we have it right now, there's a lack of communication and a lack of consistency between EPPs and LEAs, and trying to find a way to make that, because I kind of feel like this is residency that we have, and a lot of the problems we have is the what are the requirements, and people really not understanding what the rules and regulations and how it all works and what EPPs are offering and whatever. So just kind of streamlining that process a little bit. So if I misspoke, add in anybody.
Thank you, Jennifer. Group 4, Heather, Ray, Christina, Jennifer, Andrew, Megan.
I'm the spokesperson for our group. So the first question that we answered is, what should the entry criteria be for the learning permit? Just like everyone else, we wanted to make sure that these folks were in an apprentice model with an experienced teacher physically present in the classroom with them, and that they had an associate's degree in an area that connects to the teaching position, and that they had some kind of relevant experience, whether that was gained through their associate's degree or direct experience working in schools or with children. we spent most of our time, they asked the dangerous question of additional comments, share other information, and we had lots of comments. One of them being that we really think the term learning permit needs to be revised. It sounds like a driver's license. And do we need to involve the Apprenticeship North Carolina program in these conversations since they're already working with our community college and apprenticeship models? Would learning permit folks replace teacher assistants or instructional assistants in the classroom? Would there be 3 people in a classroom? How would that work? We think this is probably connected more to budgeting and allotments, but we wanted to make sure that that was on the radar, because we don't want our learning permit folks becoming TAs, and not being able to do the learning permit activities because they're doing all the other work. And who provides support for the advanced level teacher supervising the learning permit teacher? What's that going to look like, to make sure that they have everything that they need because they're taking on a bit of responsibility here? And then the last thing we wanted to kind of put on the radar is how are these advanced licensure level positions being allocated across the state? Could individual districts supplement so that they could have more of them? We're really worried, could this become an inequitable situation or make an inequitable situation even worse? We're not sure it's realistic to think people would move districts. Did I miss anything, folks? I was trying to go quickly.
That was good. Thank you, Heather. Group 5, Cheryl Ray, Randy, Tony, Tom.
All right. I was the scribe. Thanks, man. So the first question for us was, what should the entry criteria be for license 1? And we spent most of our time on this question and really on one area within that, pertaining to whether there should be a minimum content standard for the degree. Should it change? What should it look like as you move to license 2? And then where a lot of our time was spent was, should it really be differentiated at license 1 between a standard for content knowledge versus pedagogical knowledge? And through discussion of the group, there was a sentiment that emerged through the group that at license 1, if you're the instructor of record at license 1, you should have the demonstrated content knowledge there. And the pedagogical knowledge could come a little bit later. So we spent quite a bit of time talking about that and the group sentiment on the importance. The challenge that's presented if you come in without the content knowledge. And so perhaps then this reflects a potential change to the model that's presented, where license 2 is not necessarily the either or, but the content knowledge becomes required at license 1. We talked a little bit about what the minimum criteria should be for a license 1 with respect to content, and 24 hours was in content was mentioned as a criteria. And then we spent a little bit of time talking about how should the LEA school district support teaching and holding license 1. A lot of the same concepts were mentioned that other groups mentioned. Collaboration between the LEA and UPP, having the flexibility in EPP class times and having time with the instructor to work with the mentor teacher is critical. Other members of the team, I invite you to add to what I've presented.
You did a great job, Randy.
Agreed.
Thank you, Randy. We have about 10 minutes left in the meeting, by the way. I have one other sort of major question I want to ask folks. But anybody have a strong need to share any observations or call maybe points about the discussions we've just had?
Josie, this is Olivia Oxendine speaking up at this point. I don't want to take time away from the wrap up of the meeting, just to say thank you to everyone for taking part in this exciting project. Um, I do want to say a word or two. My comment was a learning permit is DMV-ish, and I want to I want to say something other than that. And we have spent a lot of time talking about the word mentor and mentorships. I think that, to me, this is where we're really going to have to put our heads together and rethink the role of the mentor. That role is going to be so critical in the preparation of these future way of thinking about teachers. And the practical side of it is this: principals have a difficult time finding mentors for teachers. It's very, very difficult for a variety of reasons. But within this group, we can begin thinking about that. So I'm wanting to elevate my thought beyond learning permit is DMV-ish. So about mentoring is very, very important. Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Kim, could you bring up the pathway visual? I just want to share one closing recommendation Hank and I, when we met with Tom and Andrew and Kim, put on the table, and the suggestion was to bring it here for the group. Well, actually, there are two things. Number one, and we discussed this in our first breakout group, license 3, which is the EPP component, is the only one of the first 4 that does not have a funding component that's tied to a critical stage in the pathway. And Hank suggested that we might want to consider, as we move forward, do we want to try to frame a compensation component for EPP students who make it to the internship, because that would be parallel to, for example, today when we talked about the learning permit, the apprentice step, that we're, to provide that financial incentive and the financial support for people who have made it to that stage of the license 3 EPP part of the pathway. So that was one suggestion, and my understanding is we can certainly put that feedback in the breakout groups and in terms of the pathway document. But the second was one of the parts of the conversation, regardless of which licensure point a person finds themselves, they're going to need to access a professional knowledge base. They're going to need to be able to connect with agencies, organizations, whatever institutions, whatever it might be, to be able to access a professional knowledge base that is going to support them in being successful at the entry point in where they come into the pathway. So the modification to the visual would be across the bottom. We have, think about it as a current that goes all the way across the bottom from left to right, and the columns sit on that. And what's in that current are institutions of higher education, school districts, regional agencies, Department of Public Instruction, all of the sources of professional knowledge that can be accessed at the different points where as folks are in the pathway, they find themselves needing to access that knowledge base. And so we would represent that across the bottom with all of the pathway components tied to it. So each one of those entities that I just referenced that are part of that process now in different places, in different components, would sit underneath the different licensure components, pathways. That was possibly a fuzzy way of explaining it, and Hank had to step off. Did that make any sense?
So I have a question, and I may just be overlooking it or may just be missing the point altogether. Someone that goes the traditional route through a 4-year college or university, through an educator program, when they graduate, where are they? Are they on this chart? Or
I'll try to answer that. They are successfully completed the program, they move to license 4. Tom, did I explain the intent of that correctly?
Well, I think you got to contextualize it in just what we're seeing now. So, with a completer now, a completer can finish the program and not pass the licensure test, and not having completed the EdTPA or the pedagogy. So, if that's the case, that person would wind up in license 1. Presumably, the way I'm understanding the model. I'm not trying to tell you how it is. I'm trying to tell you how I understand it. If that person passed the content exam but not the pedagogy, they'd be a license 2. And if the person comes out of the EPP having completed both those requirements, they would move immediately to license 3. So to answer your question, it depends on the demonstrations that they provided as a result of completing the EPP.
Yes, assuming they had successfully completed those expectations. And I'm glad you asked the question, because it reminded me of the conversation with Hank when we met as co-chairs, that we don't want to make an assumption that EPPs, institutions of higher education, for example, sit just under license 3. It's a knowledge base and a professional source of support that people at different licensure stages or states might access. And one of the things I liked about the summary document, there are several references to community colleges, institutions of higher education, and school districts working together to provide that professional support. And I actually think that would be a major step forward for the state if we really could build out that infrastructure where those 3 components work together to provide that professional knowledge base and those experiences.
Hey Tom, I've got a question. So as you were explaining that, I looked at this a little differently. I think when I originally looked at the graphic, my understanding was that under license, by the end of license 3, you had to have demonstrated mastery of content and pedagogy by one of those things. It didn't occur to me that you had to have it to get the license 3. So when I think about my current ed program graduates who have struggled in 3 years to pass the elementary math test, whatever it might be. So if they graduate without having taken that test but not passed it, what I heard you say is that they would actually end up back at a license 1 and not be at a license 3 with a year to complete that. Did I hear that correctly?
So I'm gonna issue my standard disclaimer. I am repeating what I've heard from others in the Human Capital Roundtable is the vision here. The idea is, so I think it's easiest to take away the EPP participation as a factor in this, and think about anybody if they come in, if there's no demonstration of content or pedagogy skill, they're a license 1. This model, they complete either one of those requirements, they move to a license 2. They complete the other one that they didn't complete before, they move to a license 3. And then from the time they're there, they work to meet the requirements to move to a license 4, which is impact on students. And so you're getting away from the demonstration of skill and competency and moving more towards impact with this transition from 3 to 4. So then when you add in the EPP, what we're saying, and what the Human Capital Roundtable has been saying is, well, we already know what the best way to get both those demonstrations of competency and skill is. That's an EPP. Because prior to 2016, EPPs cranked out teachers who met all the requirements before they ever entered the classroom. before we gave them the 3-year, deferment of those requirements. So we know that that's the best way. So that's what the star with the EPP on top is to say, folks who do EPPs are really well positioned to hit the model at license 3 rather than starting back here on the left in license 1 or license 2. I hope that makes sense.
It does, but it makes me rethink, it makes me think about a license 1 very differently in our conversation in our small group, about, I was thinking of it as I have not, participated in any, education block kind of classes, and having that bachelor's degree in English. That was kind of my thought about license 1. Not that I have completed all of that, but I just wasn't able to pass the English praxis. So that's I gotta think through that a little bit.
Yeah, and Ray, as we move left to right with the conversations like we had today, we're going to sort of make those kinds of things explicit, and then we get to circle back to license 1. Now that we've had this conversation about, in a future meeting about license 3, it's going to create a more informed conversation about license 1 and license 2, as we understand the relationships across the different access points, entry points.
But I don't think there's any expectation built in here that the people in license 1 are going to have any specific teacher preparation. There's nothing here that says that they have to have done what Ray just suggested.
But we can make that recommendation in the deliberations we're going to have. We can put that language on the table, as that's what this process is.
So I don't think you were wrong, Ray, in your thinking about license 1, because I think there's a possibility this could be set up or interpreted so that you could have that bachelor's degree could be in anything, right? And you could be in license 1, and you would not necessarily have had any kind of education, observation, or any of those things. So I think that, to Dan's point, I think that's something that we have to discuss and say, like, what are our baseline expectations of somebody who's going to be in this license 1 and going to be in a classroom as a teacher of record in front of children? What do they need to have demonstrated, or what experiences do they need to have in order to, for us to say that's okay, right?
Well, because license 1 is basically what we have in residency now. They don't have any education experience, they just have some content knowledge expectations, and they don't have any teaching experience, and that's what the residency program is now.
That's the way I was thinking about it as well, Christina and Jennifer. So when Tom was talking about you completed the whole ed program, but then haven't demonstrated through the testing of the micro-credentials or those kind of things that you would go back, not backwards, but you would go to that lower level license. I just had not thought about it that way. So that was just something to ponder for me, for sure.
Which is, and by the way, folks, it's 5 after, and people are probably going to start stepping off. That is in essence what happens now if they don't complete the components. Their option at that point would be they're in those first 3 years, but then they got to explore, what do I do if I still want to be a teacher? But everything everybody was just saying, make sure we capture that, because that's what we want to integrate into this in the analysis of the pathway. Is the kinds of things people are, the kinds of questions people are raising. We want to make sure those get captured.
I think, Kim, there's a way it captures everything everyone said. I don't know if there's a way that Kim can download it.
What?
Like, Kim machines and highlights, if you
So I turn on the closed captioning, and that I'm recording the meeting, and as soon as it stops recording, then it provides me with a transcript.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll have this we'll have this to use for later subsequent conversation. Kim, I want to be mindful of people's time, and it's a little after 5. Any logistical sort of next steps to share with about the next meeting, when we meet again?
I can look up that date for.
Yeah, I can pull up a calendar that.
It is June 16th from 8 to 10 a.m.
Okay. And then we're going to try to capture all this, continue to build a summary document that Kim shared, make sure that gets out to people so people will have a chance to look at that when we get back together again. But we really want to keep this recursive process going where we're bringing exactly the kind of critique that we did today and that people shared in the last 10 or 15 minutes. That's how we're building this out. Unless there are additional critical items, I can entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
I think who made the motion? I didn't capture it, Kim.
Jennifer Russell.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer.
Okay, thank you.
I'll second. Christina, I'll second.
Thank you, Christine. All in favor?
Aye.
I think we are adjourned. Thank you all very much. We're off to a good start, I think. Thank you all, the people who were recorders and the folks who were summarizers. Thank you also for that.